The Pirates had a lethal 8 and 9 inning combo in Colin Holderman and David Bednar last year. With the addition of Aroldis Chapman, just how good can the trio of relievers be in Pittsburgh, and could it be MLB's best trio?
You are Locked On Pirates, your daily Pittsburgh Pirates podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome back, everybody, to the Locked On Pirates podcast here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team, your Pittsburgh Pirates every day. I am, of course, your host, Ethan Phil Garner-Smith, as everybody likes to keep giving wonderful comparisons to my mustache lately, but I'm absolutely loving it. Thank you for tuning into the Locked On Pirates podcast, as you always do here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team, your Pittsburgh Pirates every day. I'm always bringing you your news, reactions, analysis, and opinions to everything going on in the world of the Pittsburgh Pirates. Make sure you follow this show on all of your podcast platforms. And today's show is also brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel Sportsbook is your one-stop shop for all of your Super Bowl betting this Sunday. We'll talk about them in just a little bit. The player preview series continues on today's episode. We've already talked about Mitch Keller. We've talked about Martin Perez and Marco Gonzalez. We've talked about the trio of Quinn Priester, Roansy Contreras, and Luis Ortiz. We've even talked about Jared Jones, Anthony Solometo, and Paul Skeens. Today's episode is about yet another trio. And on today's player preview series, it's all about the back end of the Pirates bullpen, or at least what it should be. I would say, obviously there's no real givens in baseball, but I would say this is pretty close to a given to say that David Bednar, Colin Holderman, and Aroldis Chapman will be the 7, 8, 9 guys for this Pittsburgh Pirates bullpen. And let's just get right into it, folks, because last season, Colin Holderman, folks, and David Bednar, that was the thing. You had your setup guy, you had the closer that really, between the two as a duo, was one of the best in baseball. You look at Colin Holderman as the holder, like the hold guy. You look at David Bednar being another all-star campaign. And then you insert Aroldis Chapman into this, folks, and that dynamic changes a bit. It does. But it all starts and, ends with the Renegade. Because, the bullpen's success usually starts with a closer. Now, albeit that might sound a little bit backwards, but the closer is the guy that in those one-inning games, he's the guy that wins you or loses you the game more often than not. And that's what you'd like to see. Now, since his arrival in 2021, David Bednar, we know, he's quickly became one of the best closers in all of baseball. He's boasted a 2.25 ERA and a 2.56 FIP with a 31% strikeout rate since he started donning the black and gold of his home. Of course, the Mars native coming back to Pittsburgh in that San Diego Padres trade. He's, again, become an all-star in Pittsburgh for the past 2 years. He's posted 69 or more strikeouts in all 3 of his campaigns in Pittsburgh. Now, you look at 2023, and that's kind of what we're doing here, is taking what these guys have done in 2023 and kind of previewing 2024 for them. And there's no doubt in anybody's mind that 2023 was indeed David Bednar's best season. Now, obviously, a lot of that has to contribute to the fact that this was also the best Pirates team that David Bednar has been a part of since his arrival. But he had career highs in saves, career highs in innings pitched, career high in ERA, and a career high in strikeouts. And you also know that Ethan's going to bring up StatCast on the show because he absolutely loves advanced analytics, and David Bednar's advanced statistics are just as good, if not better. He ranked in the 95th percentile or higher in expected ERA, expected batting average, and chase rate. He also ranked in the 85th percentile or higher in fastball velo, whiff rate, strikeout rate, and barrel rate. So David Bednar is elite, folks. I don't think you really needed your host, Ethan Smith, to really tell you that one, but he was top 5 in saves last year, and that'll tell the story and some, and that's what it should do. Now, a lot of people with the introduction of Aroldis Chapman, who we're going to talk about in the second segment of today's show, kind of were wondering what was going to happen here, because David Bednar obviously has been the closer for quite some time. He's pretty much cemented himself into that role, especially with playing Renegade in the ninth inning in PNC Park. And his closer role isn't going to go anywhere. I want to urge people with that right now that David Bednar's closer role is going absolutely nowhere. He's not going anywhere. At least he shouldn't. And that's what I would say here. And his stuff also isn't going anywhere with, I would say, myself and many not really expecting much of a regression or a drop off from him, because you look at some of the stuff that Bednar did last year in that career high season and his best season he's had to date, between his fastball and his curveball last year, which he threw over 180, excuse me, 850 times. There we go. English is hard, folks. He allowed a batting average below the Mendoza line using that duo of pitches. Now, obviously, his least thrown pitch, the split finger, got beat up a bit, allowing a 333 average. But again, it's a pitch that he threw only about 170 times compared to 850 combined with the fastball and the curveball. And as you may have heard in these other player preview series shows so far, even with the likes of Mitch Keller, Martin Perez, and Marco Gonzalez, and now David Bednar, I've spoken a lot more about the improvements that some of these players can make in 2024 rather than trying to project what they're going to do. And I don't want it to really project what they're going to do. Personally, projections for me are always kind of very interesting, especially when it comes to statistics for players. I think when you're projecting what a player can do, it's a little bit different, but I don't like labeling like, oh, I think David Bednar is going to have 60 saves this year. I'm just not going to like really want to project that kind of thing, because then if he doesn't even come close to it, I just look dumb. But when you look at the improvements that Bednar can make, really the only thing you'd like to see is bringing down the hard hit rate and bringing up the ground ball rate. Now, those have been his lowest percentile metrics ever since he came up here. It's just something that everything else is elite. And those are the two things that he usually struggles with. Now, even going back to 2022, that's been his worst metrics. So I'd like to see them at least be around league average. Last year, he brought them up, I believe, to the 41st and 32nd percentile, respectfully. That was hard hit rate and ground ball rate. But I also understand that when you look at how Bednar pitches on the mound, and he pitches with that elite fastball and that curveball combination, he's more often than not going to give up hard contact, but he also does pretty well in expected slugging and expected batting average and expected ERA. So he's obviously doing something right. But I would like to see him get the ball on the ground a little bit more, but also with curveballs, 9 times out of 10, they're going to be either just weak pop flies or just something in the dirt. And that's really what David Bednar has made his calling card, is the curveball fastball combination. Outside of that, though, just don't expect anything different from David Bednar. I just don't think we truly need to. I don't think this guy is anywhere close to stopping from where he's been as a baseball player. I don't think he's going to stop being a top 5 closer in the National League or maybe in even all of baseball. And an all-star campaign at this point should always be expected now. I mean, he's done it for the last 2 years, and I see no reason why he won't again this year, seeing to me that he's easily a top 5 closer in the National League. I just truthfully believe that. And his job really is about to get a lot easier. Now, obviously, a lot of these relief pitchers do like those high pressure, high octane situations, but you look at what Bednar now has working in front of him with a top 10 setup reliever last year, who was 8th in holds in Colin Holderman, and of course, Aroldis Chapman, who's kind of set himself up in a setup role over the past 2 seasons. David Bednar's job gets a little bit easier, folks, and I think he can take a little bit of pressure off of coming in the 9th inning, probably with a lead more often than not this year, especially if that offense can live up to its potential. But that's later in the player preview series. But folks, before we talk about Aroldis Chapman, of course, the signing none of us truly expected, but it may be one of the best of the offseason. We're going to talk about FanDuel. FanDuel Sportsbook, of course, folks, is your one place to do all of your Super Bowl betting this Sunday because happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about scoring the best seat on the couch, grabbing your favorite football snacks, and placing some super bets. I've said it before, I'll say it again, folks. Parlay it. Bet the over. Christian McCaffrey anytime touchdown, Travis Kelce anytime touchdown, and you will absolutely love it alongside your Buffalo Wings. FanDuel has so many ways for you to end the season with a W or two or even three. Not only can you bet on who will win Super Bowl 58, but FanDuel also has bets for which players will score a touchdown, how many points will be scored, and so much more. New customers join today and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. So just visit fanduel.com/lockedon to sign up. That's fanduel.com/lockedon and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL and an official sponsor of the Locked On Podcast Network. And folks, also don't forget that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now you can also find it on Amazon Fire TV. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find the Locked On Sports Today channel now on Amazon Fire TV or YouTube. And folks, welcome back to the second segment of today's episode of Locked On Pirates here on the Locked On Podcast Network, Padcast Network. There you go. Tried to get a little of the Wisconsin going on there with the Padcast, you know. Shout out to everybody in the network who does work with Wisconsin over there. Locked On Packers, Locked On Bucks, Locked On Brewers. There you go. Shout out to all of those guys. Little plug. Also, for a little plug with me, make sure you check out all of my work over at Steel City Pirates. Also, make sure you check out all of these extra shows that I've had. I have the player preview shows all in a nice little playlist for you. So if you want to listen to them back to back to back to back to back to back, just do that. Be really nice. Be really thankful that you do it. Make sure you like and subscribe on YouTube. Leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Leave a review on Spotify. Just do all the stuff because, you know, you guys love me. At least I hope you do. Now, in this dynamic of the bullpen, Aroldis Chapman just a few weeks ago was the surprise addition that the Pirates made. Now, I didn't expect it. I don't think many of you expected it. And initially, I will admit, I didn't really understand it all that much. In the signing, pretty widely, I would say, from the initial reactions that I saw, kind of was met with negative remorse, if that's the right word. I would say, especially with the price tag that we saw on it, but that's just the market for relievers and pitchers in general right now. But after, obviously, I recorded that show a few weeks ago when I was breaking it down and taking a deeper dive, as again, we've already done on the show, I think this signing is a slam dunk, folks. I just really do. And you've already seen a lot of people say the stuff about his off field issues and a lot of other things. Folks, I'm going to break this down as far as it pertains to the baseball field and the game that's being played. That's how I'm going to do it. And the only thing that I actually will say on it is it happened a very long time ago. That doesn't make it any better, but just evaluate Chapman as a baseball player. I think that's where we can leave that. Now, Chapman, obviously, he's reverted away from a closer role the past couple years. We've seen that kind of reversion. He's at 35 years of age now, so you can kind of expect that he was going to eventually take a new role at some point to be able to continue to play and also be able to continue to play at a high level and get price tags like he got from the Pirates this year. But he only had 15 combined saves after having 30 in 2021. Those 15 combined saves were in the past two seasons. Obviously, 2022 did see him have a shorter season due to injury, but you look at last year, what he did with Kansas City and Texas, folks, and it is hard to not look at him and say he performed at a potentially elite level. Chapman had a 3.09 ERA in 61 games last year combined between his time with the Royals and the Rangers. And in 51 and a third innings pitched, he had 103 strikeouts and a 1.25 whip. Now, if I showed you those numbers without a player name shown, for those who still might not really like the Chapman signing, you would take that immediately, wouldn't you? Because I would. I would take that absolutely every day of the week. And even at age 35, I mean, Chapman lit up StatCast again. If you ever have free time, even during this show, if you want to just listen to me talk in the background, open up StatCast on your phone or your computer or anything like that and just go look at Aroldis Chapman's StatCast metrics just throughout his entire career. Folks, it is a lot of red, and it's a lot of good red, because he was in the 90th percentile or higher last year in expected ERA, expected batting average, fastball velocity, average exit velocity, whiff rate, strikeout rate, and extension. At age 35, this guy still has it, folks. He really does. And Aroldis Chapman, again, you just look at the kind of player and what he's going to bring this team. And one, all of his pitch values last year were pluses. And what's great really about this signing and what Chapman's going to do is he has no pressure to revert back to a closer. Bednar is going to do that primarily. Now, I'm not ruling out that we could see Chapman in the ninth inning of games, depending on rest and injury and other factors that always impact a bullpen. And you look at the role that Chapman's going to have, he's likely the eighth inning guy. I think a lot of us can agree with that. He's likely going to be that player for this team. And I've spoken that will be primary, but matchup decisions, etc., can change that. And the final two innings with Aroldis Chapman, folks, who again was a pitcher who had 103 strikeouts in 58 innings, and a back-to-back All-Star closer in David Bednar, that's your eighth and ninth inning tandem. I mean, folks, if I'm an opposing team or opposing hitter, that just gives me a headache. Like, just even thinking about it. That makes that almost impossible for opposing teams. And considering possible regression, which you have to with a guy of Aroldis Chapman's age, I still think he was very good last year. I've already mentioned that. Performing to an adequate enough level for Kansas City to where they were able to trade him to Texas and for Texas to give him playoff playing time. There were some big moments for Aroldis Chapman in the playoffs last year with the Texas Rangers. So he's still that good. And regression can happen, but as I've said before, just because a player regresses doesn't mean it's necessarily a bad thing. It's natural. It happens to everybody. And in truth, the Chapman signing does one thing for this Pirates team, and it's something they haven't been able to do in quite some time, and that's shorten baseball games, folks. That is one of the most important things that any team, the Pirates, the Cardinals, anybody, can do. And with the rotation being a question mark as a whole still at this juncture, I mean, you have Keller, you have Perez, you have Gonzalez. You're going to likely have one of Priest or Ortiz or Contreras or two of them, Bailey Falter, Jackson Wolf. There's still questions there. Having the ability to shorten games when your rotation has questions, especially when Aroldis Chapman and David Bednar are your options in the final two innings, that's something that could swing the tide for a few games for this team. And in baseball, especially in a very winnable division, that could be the difference between the Pirates being in a contention season or another down year. And Chapman just also has a presence about him that oozes production. He's just always been a guy that has produced at the MLB level. And the Pirates bullpen was already pretty good last year, and now it's even better with this signing. And again, it can be expected that Chapman may take a small step back in production. But you also have to consider that his role is not closer. His role is setup guy. And realistically, if he is struggling, and we're going to talk about this on tomorrow's show, the Pirates bullpen is pretty loaded with options, folks, including a guy who just so happens to be in the top 10 in holds last year in Colin Holderman, who could also still slot in and be that eighth inning guy, depending on matchups, depending on rest. But you're looking at a back end of a bullpen right now, folks, that has the potential to be absolutely elite. And I'm not just throwing that word out there to make it sound clickbaity. I'm saying it for real because we're going to talk about Colin Holderman still having a massive role in this bullpen, as he should, and how he brings the trio together and why this team has an elite 7, 8, 9, 1, 2, 3 punch that could be very, very vital to their contention in 2024. We're going to talk about that in just a moment, but a word from our sponsors. Everydayers, welcome back to the third segment of today's episode of Locked On Pirates. You guys are absolutely phenomenal. Always tuning into these shows all the way through. I did notice an uptick in how long you guys have been watching the episode. So thank you so much for that. We are again back to 5 days a week. I know last Friday I missed, but we will be here tomorrow and Friday this week. And then if anything else happens, there's going to be a chance for extra episodes because I have all these episodes written out and ready to go. It's just more of, are the Pirates going to do anything else? So the player preview series continues. And to wrap up today's show with the third segment, and this is, again, something that we've already kind of talked about on this show, Colin Holderman really last season was one of the more, if not the most, underrated reliever or one of in baseball. And I don't say that lightly because one of the biggest gripes that I saw on the Chapman edition from folks was that it was a gut punch to Colin Holderman. And he became a staple last year. He just genuinely did. He was a staple in the Pirates bullpen last year, and he was the primary setup guy. And he did well in that role as well. He had a 3.86 ERA in 56 innings, 58 strikeouts, and a 1.34 whip. You'll take that all day. Now, he also isn't the household name that many would know around baseball, but as I've mentioned, he was a top 10 reliever in holds last year. He ranked 8th in that category in 2023 with 2027, and it was a loaded group up there in the holds. I mean, he was in pretty good company on that list, only 4 holds short of Yanir Cano and Hector Neris, who I would consider 2 of baseball's best relievers last year. And even with Chapman's addition, folks, I don't think that you're really going to see Colin Holderman all of a sudden just diminish into nothing in this bullpen. I don't. I think that he's a very talented kid. Well, kid. I think he's a very talented individual. Sorry, I didn't mean to call him a kid. And you just move him an inning earlier, more than likely in most cases. He's likely going to be your primary 7th inning guy, which I did look at the splits last year. He only pitched 6 innings in the 7th inning last year. He had a 4.5 ERA and a 1.5 whip, with obviously, again, most of his work coming in the 8th inning. Now, which I'm trying to just say this in the funnest way possible, because I even want to clip this, because if this actually happens, folks, it's going to be crazy. Having Holderman move to the 7th inning, knowing, by the way, that on a full rest day or whatever, that you have Aroldis Chapman, a World Series setup man, and one of the best relievers of the past decade, and David Bednar, a 2-time All-Star who has not had over a 2.6 ERA since he's come to Pittsburgh. Behind you, waiting in the wings when you're there in the 7th inning with a lead, or even without a lead. Folks, that is a scary thought in a good way. That is just, I mean, folks, that's why this signing of Chapman was so good, because of what the Pirates already had here, and they just made it an absolute strength. And one thing Holderman does well and will continue to do well, by the way, is miss barrels and illicit grounders. His 2 highest his highest StatCast metrics last year, outside of fastball velocity, of course, were his barrel rate and his elite ground ball rate. So you look at Holderman, who's had a below a 4 ERA in each of his first 2 years and 84 and a third innings pitched with Pittsburgh. Yeah, he enters with a smaller role, quote unquote. So why does this trio have the potential to be MLB's best trio as far as a 7, 8, 9 inning relief combination goes? Well, for starters, and when I did this math, I had to recheck it 4 times to make sure that I checked this math correctly. These 3 players last year, folks, and I'm just going to give you 3 numbers. These 3 players last year combined to have a 2.98 ERA, 241 strikeouts, and a 1.23 whip. That is just those 3 combined. That is not considering everything else the Pirates bullpen did last year. Those numbers coming from just 3 relievers, that is something that a team will just salivate over if they can get those kind of numbers from their back end of their rotation. And you also have to consider that with that 2.98 ERA, the Pirates bullpen had a 4.27 ERA last season and was already quite impressive. We talked about that a little bit too when we were talking about how good the potential of Dauri Moreta and Carmen Majinski and, all the other guys that are potentially there in that bullpen that can really make an impact. And you already had a good bullpen. The bullpen was already pretty good. Again, you had Moreta, you had Majinski, you had Baraki, you had Holderman, you had Bednar, you had Hernandez. There was a lot to like about the bullpen last year already. Now you have Colin Holderman as your 7th inning guy. You could have Carmen Majinski as your 6th inning guy. I'm not going to talk about this too much because that's what we're talking about on tomorrow's show is the rest of the bullpen. But on top of adding Chapman, you have created a bullpen now, especially a back end of a bullpen that truly has upside through the roof. And as I stated earlier, again, it shortens games for this team. That is the biggest thing that I think that Chapman, Holderman, and Bednar can do for this team is that they can perform at the level that they performed at last year and get around that combination of numbers that I told you earlier, or even near it. Folks, the Pirates are going to win a lot of games that they shouldn't. And that's something you got to do in baseball because regression is always possible, sure. But again, we haven't seen it really from this trio of pitchers, and there's no reason to really see it from Bednar and Holderman because they're still very young into their careers. Chapman hasn't shown much regression either. And again, if they match or even come close to their productions in 2023, folks, no one, and I mean no one, if these guys are on the top of their game, will want to face the Pirates after the 6th inning. Shortening games is one of the most important things a baseball team can do over the course of 162 games because it can swing the tide in games very quickly. It can help you win those 1-run or 2-run games where things get dicey in the 7th, 8th, and 9th inning. Those games, especially with less division games now in the NL Central, which is a very winnable NL Central, are the games that you're going to look back and say Colin Holderman, Aroldis Chapman, and David Bednar shut things down for this team. They got that win because that's something we've seen in the past. We've seen the bullpens kind of ride the Pirates out of games. A lot of this hinges on the starting pitching production too. But if the starting pitchers can go 5 innings, 5, that's all you're asking of at least decent, not even quality. You don't even have to get to 6 and make a quality start. Just 5 innings of 3 earned runs or less. And as long as the offense is also playing at a good level, you're handing it off to a bullpen, folks, that has the potential to be the best one in baseball. And I say that confidently. I say that very confidently. This bullpen, not only Aroldis Chapman, Holderman, and Bednar having the potential to be the best trio, if they are the best trio, this bullpen has the chance to be the best in baseball. And we're going to talk about the rest of the bullpen on tomorrow's show. But folks, thank you so much for tuning in to the Locked On Pirates podcast here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team, your Pittsburgh Pirates every day. My name is Ethan Smith. You can follow me on Twitter at MVP_Ethan or at Locked On Pirates for all of your news, analysis, opinions, and reactions to everything going on in the world of the Pittsburgh Pirates. Make sure you also find this podcast on all of your podcast platforms, including YouTube, because it is free and available to you everywhere. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Amazon Fire TV, YouTube. You can find it anywhere. And again, folks, we're talking about the rest of the bullpen on tomorrow's show, and then we're shifting to talking about Henry Davis this Friday. Be on the lookout for those, but until then, folks, I will see you on the flip side.